Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us for this debate on the occasion of 30th anniversary of the Foundation Center for Democracy. Center for Democracy was established in 1994 at the moment when our country was undergoing war, economic, social, and other turmoil, and the group gathered around Dragoljub Mićunović, Vida Ognjenović, Nataša Vučković, Slobodan Georgiev, and others established the Democratic Center. And the goals from 30 years ago are the same as the Foundation's goals now. Development of democracy, spreading democratic ideas, development of the parliament and promoting parliamentarianism, democratic political culture development, human rights promotion, and so on. The fact that Centar was established in one country and it's celebrating its 30th anniversary in a third or fourth country as a state in a row, still addressing the same issues, is indicating that we are stuck and that we haven't got the job done. It's been 24 years since the democratic change. 24 years ago, on this date, we knew there would be no second round of democratic elections, that the democratic opposition won, and the question was whether the result would be defended on the 5th of October, and it was defended. Together in this, opposition parties, NGOs, and a number of media that were not controlled by the government, all joined forces. So the question is whether such a victory is possible today when we are also defending democracy and free elections. Who are the allies in this? What are civil society and democratic parties advocating for democratic change now to each other? And in methodology for fighting for democracy, should anything be changed? And how should civil society improve its role in protection of human rights and liberties? And after 30 years of fighting for democracy, what are the lessons learned and how applicable are they today? These and many other questions will be tackled by Nataša Vučković, director of the Foundation Center for Democracy. Hello, Natasha, and happy birthday. Then Bojana Selaković, coordinator of the National Convention on the European Union. Thank you for being with us. Vukosava Crnjanski, director of CRTA. Hello, Vukosava. Jelena Jerinić, professor of Law School of Union University and a member of Parliament on behalf of Green Left Front. Miloš Đajić, chair of the Managing Board of the Center for Modern Skills. Thanks for joining us. And Slobodan Georgiev, my colleague, journalist, who is also director of Nova TV News program. Thank you for taking the time and for being with us. So I would like to start from Natasha, because she's celebrating her anniversary. It just occurred to me that in the 90s, when the foundation came into being, the Center for Democracy Foundation, it was 2 years after the, 2 years before the first great victory of opposition local elections in Belgrade, and 6 years before the national elections victory. So if you could gauge the hope you had back then and now, when you are into reforms and other topics, as we just said, going more in-depth, not all that much horizontally, this amount of hope that things will indeed change, when were your hopes higher? Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for the good wishes on the occasion of our anniversary. Let me just say that it's been 30 years, and for us who participated in this for the past 30 years, it seemed like in a wink, this lapse of time, but it's an enormously long period. So to the question of what happened, I found a parallel. It's like someone wondering in 1944 to compare that period to 1914. You see, 30 years is an enormous period in what can happen in human history. We've got a feeling that we are pecking at the perimeter, that nothing has changed. Oh, I thought you would say we are successful. No, we are in a stalemate. But there are other indicators. You asked me about hope and how we could measure hope and success of an organization. I should say hope was much higher in the 90s than now, and there are many reasons for that. The whole Europe and the whole global situation, I think there was much more hope that democracy would become a general global system. Ultimately, that's how the theory of the end of history emerged, which is not all that applicable nowadays, but the whole Europe embraced all the countries coming out of the Iron Curtain. It was rejoicing the enlargement. It was an emerging policy for United Europe. The whole European Union was prepared for that. On the other hand, we were war-ravaged, under sanctions, isolation. But on the other hand, we had the support. Civil society was weak. There were too few of us, but we knew we were on the right side, which had to win. And we believed that that victory was not too far beyond. And in this context of 30 years and everything that has been going on in the past 15, 20 years, it may not be all that long. However, I believe that all of us who have learned our lessons in the 90s and after the 5th of October 2000, we learned that these lessons are such that indicate a slow pace of our progress. And probably reform is not a task for one generation. Professor Mićunović has asked me recently, well, tell me about all the projects of the Center for Democracy. And after 15, 20 minutes, when I told him about that, he says, well, why compare that to the 90s? We had jump steps. Let's build democracy. And now you're going in depth. Laws, democracy, public policies, public papers, policy papers, democracy, democratic institutions. But the essential question is, what about the dialogue as the method that we advocated for in the 90s? And where is it? What's the state of play now? This debate is not so much about history, but about civil society today and state of play with democracy, so where we are now. Vukosava, let me ask you, CRTA is very much engaged. In the past few years, you have become respectable in your area of expertise, primarily on elections. So what would you say the greatest success is of your present-day civil sector, NGOs dealing with human rights, parliamentarianism, democracy? Yes, happy birthday first, and maybe related to this question, we may disappoint somebody thinking about the success of civil society 30 years down the road, but I think that currently, no matter how bad this may sound, but the success is the mere fact that we still exist. And this talks about where we are now and what our environment is like. And indeed, 30 years after, I can say you did it. The professor can say, of course, we are now going in depth. We lack the big things, but actually it seems to me that the mere existence of organizations defending human rights in Serbia, organizations discussing activism and organizations for free elections, unfortunately, that's the major success now. CRTA has become recognizable, but if you had asked us 10 years ago, we would be talking about open parliament and other things, and now we are talking about the success of CRTA in the area of elections, which shows a regression of this society, because I thought we were above that notch, you know, that we set the bar higher, but unfortunately we are talking about autocracy, electoral autocracy, where the time is such, and this system seems to me as created to prevent any victory of the opposition, and civil society seems like a serious enemy to this government, and to the society on the whole. So it's difficult to talk about success. It is, of course, a success when you pass a new law. Of course, depends on what law, but when you go into the past and we talk about discrimination and many reform laws, so we can, yes, we can talk about success, but I believe that today's topic should be how civil society is going to survive the blackwashing, this demonization that we got from this government. Is civil society different to media in that context? Well, when I say civil society, of course, I take a broad picture. I include media in this same landscape. But if we talk about civil society organizations, then, of course, I need to talk about free media, because we also have media that work fantastically, but they are under the paw, under the influence of the government. And the free media that want to be independent and that try to defend the journalist profession, then we're in the same boat. And yes, the right question is how we are going to survive. Bojana, is there any remedy to this? Well, indeed, the situation is by far more critical than we were able to imagine. And yes, good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations on the past 30 years to the foundation. I also keep reiterating, and now I'm more than convinced that no matter how difficult the 90s were on different grounds in terms of action in public space, it seems that the situation was easier because things were black and white. It was, you know, like Manichae, good guy and bad guy, so you could tell easily. And in the past 10 years, somehow everything is in the gray zone. It's blurred, and we have contours of everything that we need. I mean, the fundamental things that we were demanding in the 90s, they are here, but still they're not clear-cut, they're not consolidated and robust, so everything is a big pond of sludge or a big slur. So it's difficult to work on the principles that we know and that we believe in. It's difficult to all actors to function in this society, it's clear. To civil society, to media, to academic community, to business sector, it's also very difficult to work in this environment if you talk about normal principles, and it's just a big problem now. On the other hand, there is a big difference as compared to the previous period in the 90s, the global situation and the distribution of power amongst the global actors and the way they perceive the authorities in this country now. And I think that's a big stumbling block to all of us, because we keep going back to that scenario. We try to make parallel to the 90s, and in that sense the situation is incomparable. And it seems to me that in this quest of the way forward, that's the first thing that we need to bear in mind and see how we take it on board. When you say they have different attitudes, different perception, you meant the Western countries, yes, different perception of the opposition and civil society here compared to the 90s. I mean attitude to the authorities in this country, yes. But those Western countries were the allies of the civil society, and they still are. I mean, their organizations, are they still, Bojana? All these countries that were believed to be allies in different ways, let's be very clear and straightforward about it, that was their interest at the time. Any support coming to different actors, to any country undergoing the period of transition, was consequence of political attitudes and political interests of those respective countries. and international organizations. At this moment, when the situation has dramatically changed, let's take the past 2 years and even before, what the only interest of those actors is, their only interest is stability. Now it has become probably much more dramatic, like peacemaking in this part of the region and rehabilitating all possible consequences of crisis. So we end up in a situation that from a story about values, such as the European Union was, it was built as a peace-building project. Now it's become a defense alliance. So those actors changed their position not only on Serbian civil society, we are just a piece of this big puzzle, but to everything else. The environment has rapidly changed. It has changed all the time. Professor? Professor, you are now a member of parliament on behalf of the Green Left Front. So what is the opposition to civil society and vice versa? What are you to each other? It's always difficult to take questions when somebody asks me what is the opposition going to do or what does the opposition think. Because first of all, we need to decide on what opposition means. We are now in a situation when it's almost expected from the opposition to have a common position on everything, on all issues, which is unnatural, because then we wouldn't need different political parties. We would have a bipartisan system with the ruling party and one oppositional party. But when you look at all the political parties that claim to be against the SNS rule and SPS, among them there are those who don't have such a positive attitude to civil society organizations. And for some of them, well, they have more similar positions, and for others, differences and gaps are wider. Green Left Front relies on the work of other organizations too. For example, we often consult CSOs, we organize formal and informal consultations, we ask for their assistance when we draft amendments, but it's natural for us because most of us actually have stemmed out of civil society. My first job was with civic initiatives, where the director, Miljenko Dereta, whose name now is the name of these premises, this center, and I worked on a democracy program, and some people sitting here in the audience participated in that program, and other organizations worked with us, like Center for Democracy, this foundation, and we organized promotion of this for different actors across Serbia. We talked about what civil society is, what the role of media is, the role of political parties, and I think that now again we are in a situation when civil society still has the same job to do. I think besides being professional organizations that provide expertise and technical knowledge that the opposition can use for drafting amendments, and besides this control role and monitoring, it can also play an educational role, which somehow has got lost on the way, I believe, because the donors probably and sources of funding pushed the civil society more towards public policy details, and these big issues have become, well, practically unimportant because we worked on it 30 years ago. But it seems to me that, bearing in mind that the same people are in power, not only the same political parties, but the same persons, Ivica Dačić, Aleksandar Vučić, they were in power back in the 90s. And also same labels of mercenaries, traitors. There are special editions on some TV programs of how some organizations get funded. Some balance sheets were presented from some NGOs in the parliament, and my colleague Jelena Jerinić and I are on the steering committees of some of those CSOs that were so maligned. And so it's the same discourse about civil society from the 90s, but the circumstances have changed, and the method of fighting from the 90s is not applicable. So what is applicable now? Well, it's very difficult. I think literally we need to go door to door, and we should all use the terminology from the political campaign. I think it's necessary to talk to people directly and go back to the basic, because via media, that's not going to happen, because those topics seem not to be attractive anymore, but you should know better. But yeah, I think we should, talk to people. And I think political parties should do it, but also CSOs. What Nataša has just said, on the one hand, there are in-depth things happening, laws are changing, but horizontally we are talking about the fundamentals: democracy, free elections, are the elections free or not, arrests of activities, closing down media, repression. So I understand different positions of opposition parties. Of course you have them. But I would say that most opposition parties are in the same boat. Same as CSOs. Well, not all opposition parties, but most of them. And media, professional media, are not doing any better. Yes, of course, we're all in the same boat. All of us living in Serbia are in the same boat. And opposition politicians, at least, shouldn't be no different. I think it's just a matter of the way we chose to fight in. Everybody has a role to play here, but I'm afraid there is something that the Serbian Progressive Party, the ruling party, has long and successfully worked on, that political parties as a way of organization are odious, and there are no differences. All the politicians are the same. So I am the same, like Ivica Dačić, who has been in politics for more than 30 years. So these are entrenched positions, and we need to fight it, and we need to try and change it. And it's also a question of accountability. So that's why I say I can't talk on behalf of the whole opposition, because I'm sure there are opposition parties that don't have a friendly attitude towards civil society organizations. That's what I meant. But also about the being in the same boat, I think that everybody should understand that we all have a role to play, and political parties should not be expected to do the same things like opposition parties, and everybody should just do what they are supposed to do. And the civil society has got this burden of the society that, for example, in the parliament, I stand up and say that an NGO's proposal is excellent. That's what the Green Left Front supports. If I say that, this organization will be labeled as working with opposition, working against the government. They will be automatically stigmatized. The same labels that were used back in the 90s. So because of that, we need to deal with civic education. Miloš, let's just go the first round, and then we'll continue this discussion. Miloš, do you think civil society's major success is in having survived all these years? Well, I have just said to Vukosava, as we were talking, that the most important thing is that we are keeping our foot in the door. Whose door? Well, in the door of democracy, keeping the door ajar. Because if it got closed, if it disappeared, I think that there would be dark, overwhelming this whole sphere. So I think that we managed not to be afraid, but to be cautious, and that we still believe in the European integration. We believe in democracy as a rule, as something that can help us organize our lives better. We believe in people's equality and solidarity, so I think it's very precious to us, and that's where we can get connected easily, and this connection is happening. What we lack is a clear direction and clear idea of where we would like to go. And it's about lack of political articulation. That's what we expect from political parties, to tell us where we are going. Not just European integration is a process, but where we are going and how we see Serbia. That is something where we can be expert support, activist support, all manner of supporting, but it's the political parties that should be the main vectors of this. And just a small anecdote that I wanted to share with you. I've been thinking the professors will certainly remember, talking about differences, in the 90s, when most parties were made, they had democratic and democracy in their names. And in the past 8 years, as I tried to remember, it's all people or popular or Serbian. So it means that we have overcome democracy. Yeah, well, that's what we think. But actually, we're backsliding in democracy. And to quote the professor, he used to say this often, democracy demands Democrats, people who will understand democracy, who will live democracy, who will defend democracy everywhere, be it the parent-teachers meeting, be it the parliament or a meeting like this. Everybody is entitled to having an opinion. Democracy is also about accountability, so that's where the support and assistance from CRTA is very valuable, because CRTA is constantly reminding us of where accountability is. Slobodan, I've been listening to you very attentively, all of you. It seems that Professor Mićunović said, okay, say something positive. So he wants me to be on a high note. When you look at Serbia and what's going on, civil society has never been better. In Serbia, for example, it got Serbia all on the streets, in rallies, but it's a different civil sector. It's environmentalists, activists all across Serbia who stood up because something is bothering them in the villages, in the cities. It's all civil sector also. Here today, this is a different civil sector. It's a think tank civil society which wanted to help the country change. And today it's got a problem that the country, this state, doesn't care about what you have to offer. It doesn't need your knowledge. Social policy, youth policy, economic policy, any expertise, because the people in power have abolished policies, because it's not policies that they address issues, but corruption. That's why we're discussing what's happening and what's going to happen, and the whole part of civil society and part of media, which is still alive, is pushed to the margins. That's where we are. That's our field of action, and from there we are trying to do something. Civil society is still trying to do what you asked. Political parties, civil society, and everybody is thinking about whether we should work together and what's going to happen. To my mind, civil society has always been helping political parties that are for democratic system and democratic organization, be it policies or energy that it can offer. Tomorrow, for example, we will have this meeting of political parties and civil society in Gornje Nedeljice, where lithium is supposed to be excavated. So it's a vibrant landscape, no irony attached. But the question is what it can produce. This part of civil society, which is a think tank, it tried different things out in the past 30 years, and where it failed is that it didn't get its own place in the state, just as media didn't get the place they deserve. So the civil society, what exactly do you mean it didn't manage to get its own place? Well, the state failed to recognize us system-wise as a part which is important. So when we talk about what international factors did and where they pushed civil society, and people say they pushed us cooperate with the government and so on. Well, yes, that was the paradigm, that was the plan. But it did make sense. Of course, yes, it did make sense back then, but it never actually resulted in CSOs being really part and parcel of that process. In an early phase, after the year 2000, they were extremely active. When you look at all the legislative part, all the reform agenda, all the narrative that existed, this reform agenda, people from civil society participated in it all the time. Yes, that was the point I was trying to make. Of course, but it didn't provide a sure place for them. That's right, because the government changed and the environment changed. Yes, but even before that, they were excluded even by the government before the major change in 2012. And all the time you were whipped as foreign agents. Let's not avoid saying it. All the people sitting here were probably registered as foreign agents. Does it mean that civil society, Nataša and Bojana, that you lost, that you just wasted time and that we wasted time with you? No, we haven't lost time. It's the question of the project we're talking about. For example, membership in the EU was the goal, but we didn't define it that way. It was called Europeanization of Serbia. We wanted a democratic Serbia, Serbia with rule of law, equal for all, with human rights, and development which implies equal opportunities for all social groups. That was very important. And then we had a situation which we now don't have. It's consensus amongst political actors that we wanted Europeanization of Serbia. And this Europeanization of Serbia was also embraced by civil society in the 90s, and we acted in complete concordance. I'll remind everyone who remembers the campaign preceding the 5th of October, Get Out to Vote, GTV, and on the one hand there was the pool of the democratic opposition of Serbia, and then there was the pool of civil society in Serbia, Center for Democracy, Center for Development of Non-Profit Sector, civic initiatives, and we were campaigning the country. We went to villages, we talked to village people, cooperatives, all over the place. We were working together because we had a common project, and that project was Europeanization. Yes, but today we are saying that we haven't made it. Well, we have a big problem because of cynicism, which has developed lately. It's not just a Serbian property. We can see it also in the region and globally. Cynicism against democracy, that democracy is not possible or not efficient, and the European future of Serbia is blurred in terms of membership in the European Union, whether we are wanted to be a new member or not, and also other actors that have developed. It's the donor-driven civil society and to what extent donors have an influence in what's going on with civil society. So on the one hand, there is a fact that we have, because we talk about where young people are, why they're not active, why they don't attend civil instruction lessons, because after the 5th of October, we insisted on introducing this course in schools, and we can see what's happening to it now. But you see, there was a moment in 2006 or 2007 when foreign donors said alternative democratic education in Serbia is done. We don't need it anymore because civic instruction has been introduced to schools. We don't need education of young people for democracy anymore. 16 or 18 years later, we are where we are. And so when you ask how many people attend religious instruction and how many attend civil instruction, in 16 years ago, it was quite the opposite. But somehow, because of the crisis probably started in 2008, donors withdrew from educational sphere, from democracy, and there are other actors that pervaded it with their own narratives, and they're ruling public sphere and social media, and ultimately they created some organizations and they influence with those organizations. So we are fighting not only a non-democratic authoritarian system, but that system has support in other organizations and other narratives that are actually completely different. And one more thing that I want to say. The system, this one and the one from the 90s, responds equally to civil society whenever they feel a threat coming from civil society. In 1999, when they recognized the regime of Slobodan Milošević, that it's threatened by the civil society, they started with same measures as today. First, they called us CIA agents. I remember in 2000, I went to Subotica for our Politea school, and Politica Daily published an article with the title CIA School Launched in Subotica. It's just like these activists now held by the police, by the border police at the borders. And also, second, it was about finance. That's happened in the 99, and it's the reported cases of funds and some abuse, which, of course, wanted to undermine the credibility of civil society. So it shows the same reaction every time they felt there was a danger, just like on the occasion of elections and now Rio Tinto. It's always incentivized by their perception of threat. But there is one thing I don't understand. You're saying that civil society organizations are barely breathing. No, I said actually it's very vibrant. Well, you don't count. But the rest, yes, NGOs, civil society organizations. So why do they then perceive you as a threat if you can barely breathe? Because we have knowledge, because we have organizational infrastructure, we have contacts. At one point, if I may, the situation was really like, I think it's a point in the period when the parliament in Serbia was one partisan formally, and that was the peak in my analysis when I take stock of that period. That's when they launched the narrative and treatment of civil society as a political enemy, as an opponent, and when it started escalating. In essence, I think it's very important what Sloba started, and we need to understand that, because if we don't, we will just be running around the same circle. Essentially, we have never established here in Serbia a true partnership between CSOs and the government. Maybe in the first year, year and a half, but even that, the fact that we had it back then was based on personal connections and contacts. and on the enthusiasm going on, riding a wave of good energy. Basically, that period until 2012, that was a missed opportunity to build sustainable mechanisms that would enable civil society to place which should belong to it. So every time I participate in different regional initiatives, and when we draw parallels, for example, the colleagues from other countries where the situation is completely different, and where, if you take, for example, Montenegro and Kosovo and Macedonia, the circumstances of civil society development were completely different. And here, the civil society is marked with the political struggle from the 90s. And when Serbia was preparing for formal launching of negotiations with the EU, I was not part of the EU National Convention. I was with civil initiatives back then. So civil society was offered, okay, become part of the government's working group. That's the highest level of partnership, and everything about European integration we will do together, so you will be part of negotiating structures. And we said, no, we don't trust you, we will not bear the responsibility, because we know that you will bend the rules. And that's exactly what happened. For example, in Montenegro, civil society was part of negotiating structures. So in these conditions, if we can't be proactive, everything that would be good solutions that we advocate for as becoming part of the system, we are actually defending, protecting from further backsliding. And that's where we can measure our result. And if it hadn't been for us, it would be even worse. And I wouldn't say we have lost time, because many things that we take for granted now actually wouldn't have existed if it hadn't been for us. Independent institutions, introducing a legal framework for free access to information of public importance, youth policies. These are all institutionalized elements that emerged as part of advocacy initiatives. That's now, of course, the problem is that they have all been usurped, even these free institutions. But in that sense, this civil society is indeed a defense from worsening. And I have millions of examples, not to go in depth about that now, but in essence, the very fact that we're in the process of European integration, that it has never officially stopped, on the one hand, enables us to exist in this way, because in the end of the day, it does matter to some actors whether there was public participation, public consultations, whether civil society has at least been consulted or not, and on the other hand, it is becoming more of a threat. Miloš, Vukosava? Well, I just wanted to finish off this part. I think that we are perceived as opponents because we can get organized much more easily. Political parties are fragmented, and they constantly work on fragmentation. Civil society can gather 20 organizations in like 24 hours. They have resources, they have knowledge, they have people behind them who can do something, not even mention their contacts that have always been an important link and nexus. So it's very important. And that's the difference. Civil society organizations not to be fragmented and divided mutually like parties. Whether we have some power as civil society, I think we should look on it from what Sloba said. I think it's also very important to add the level of the roles of different parts of civil society, whether it's citizens associations, NGOs, activists, and so on and so forth. Now, I think an important segment in this story is the government that wants to be perceived as democratic. If they want to be recognized as such, we can do anything. Women's movement, activists, that's where we can launch initiatives. But when they close down this European integration process and when they stop their desire to be perceived as democratic, then that's when we're going to see how powerful we really are. Because it seems that because of too much talking about our success, we are not accepting things that are humanitarian. For example, the society will make progress when we see there is a remedy for a child who is dying, and we'll say, okay, let's raise funds, let's help this child. It's humanitarian, it's charity. A year ago, we had the chance for a big change in Belgrade because we proved that the elections were under fraud. There was electoral fraud that happened. So we tried and we were not able to do anything about it. So it is about power, and I think that it will soon happen when this government says we don't want to be democratic, we don't want to be at least nominally democratic. And I hope and I pray that we effect change before they say we are not going to be democratic anymore. And how do you do that? Well, ask me that in the next round. Professor? Well, I can only agree. There are organizations that have existed for a long time, like the Center for Democracy Foundation, but there are not too many of them, and I think we should recognize that what started in the mid-90s, it's a network of local organizations, that from that time, many such organizations have not survived. But there are many organizations that are local movements and informal groups. And the novelty, I think, is it's important because against such organizations, the old arguments are not valid. They cannot be used. Those that, you know, for example, foreign agents, mercenaries, traitors, and so on, because it's new people, new messages, and new ways of action and fighting. We have also discussed names of parties. Well, our party is not called the Democratic, but somehow it goes without saying that we are fighting for Serbia. But when we voted about the name of our new party, which stemmed out of let's not drown Belgrade, they just wanted us to be called Front, and our partners from abroad and even some, in green partners, they said it's too strong, why Front? It's, sounds military. But besides this message of anti-fascist front tradition, I think it's very important for people to feel this need to fight, not to surrender. And it's not just about us who got organized within the Green Left Front. It's also important in local movements because it's much more difficult for the government to fight 100 small gatherings in different places than one big rally in Belgrade, no matter how many people come. Because the question after that is what happens, what follows. I think this can only change in the elections, and I think there is this erroneous conviction that it's enough to have a large number of people in one place and everything will collapse by itself. That is just not possible. I don't mean that people sitting here think that, but the general public, because it's difficult to believe that somebody will give up on power just like that. So far, it has not changed in the elections, that's obvious. Well, not only in the elections, but we can't do without elections. That's why we're talking about everybody having a role to play. Political parties, CSOs, be them think tanks or local movements. There is a clear role to play for each and every one of us, and this is why it's necessary to coordinate things, and that's what I will finish with. Again, ending on a high note, this meeting taking place tomorrow, where it's been recognized that we don't have to do things together, we don't all have to be organizers of some rallies or protests, but we do need to exchange information and support each other. And have at least the minimum of trust. Yes, Sloba? Well, I should say there are more good things that the civil sector has done. And it was done when it was working on what actually its job was, when they advocated what they believed in and what they knew how to do. There are many things that Bojana mentioned. In the past 20 years, they were established, and now it's a different matter of how they were established, because the commissioner's institution was working differently 7 or 8 years ago, and the way they do it now. But still, we have this institution of the commissioner and the Commissioner for Free Access to Information. And civil society was working against all odds back then, and we don't have it now. I don't know why. For example, you're on this national convention. 4 years ago, it was 4 times stronger than it is now when you look at the group of organizations and the list of people. There are many of them, but most of them are not active anymore. So something has happened meanwhile, and I think what happened is that Serbia abandoned European integration, and civil society again has not advocated for European integration enough. Well, I can see the result. I will not mention individual things or organizations, but I'm saying that the European integration of Serbia is on hold. So I'm saying that civil society, which belongs to this national EU convention, whether they were forced to be there or it was on a voluntary basis, but anyway, they were the power that was supposed to push for these causes, even when we had Ms. Joksimović as a Minister of European Integration, and this lady whom I cannot recognize anymore. I mean, it's the same name, but a totally different person, Tanja Miščević. Whatever happened to her. So it's very important when civil society gets organized well, when they have a good advocacy campaign. Oftentimes they achieve good results, and it's a good experience from the previous years. Basically, you mentioned something, and that's a question also for Bojana and Nataša, and you, Slobodan. I don't know if I understood you well. About the National Convention. The National Convention tried changing things from inside, right? Well, yeah, monitoring what's happening, yes. So now, when you say they were not successful, I don't mean the convention, but the civil society organizations, think tanks, and so on. Do you think that, in a way, they supported the processes and authorities, that they were not critical enough, that that's what makes them a failure? Well, they did not push for these things. What does it mean to push? Well, insist, demand reforms, because representatives of the European Union come here, the European Commission. So pressurize them by all ways and means of doing it for this reform agenda to be number one. We will see this new progress report coming from the European Commission, and it was the news of the day last year or the year before. Now you can't even have anybody from the government come and talk about the new progress report. And let me just say about National Convention, Bojana is probably going to defend it, and I will defend it as one of its founders. The mission of the convention is to follow the accession negotiations and the conduct of the government in that. There are no new clusters, no new negotiating chapters open, so we are backsliding. But, for example, my impression of the convention as a journalist, at one moment, people who belonged to the convention had enough understanding for the behavior of the government in this European integration process. No, I think we were very critical against many negotiating positions and their way of working. Chapter 23, well, it's not just about being critical against the government. You need to advocate for reforms, just that. The government says we are on the European way. They keep saying it, but they're not doing anything about it. And your way of advocating for the reforms is saying, no, we are not on the European pathway. Well, it can't be the first sentence. It's about telling them you need to do this first. Well, things have changed dramatically from the moment of opening the negotiations until the present day. So on the one hand, civil society can say so if we say that Serbia is heading for full membership in the EU, but Serbia has not opened any negotiating chapter since December 2021. So we have tangible progress, and there are different reasons why it happened. There are different decision makers and actors in the European Union who take decisions on whether a country can open a new chapter. So we are talking about technical criteria. Serbia has got problems with political criteria. This is why some member states at the number of the European Union Council, they don't want to give the green light for Serbia to make further progress in the European accession. And CSOs that are in this convention, Center for Democracy, EUCOM, Belgrade Center for Security Policy, Civic Initiatives, they're all part of the EU convention. And they're monitoring their respective chapters that they deal with. So these organizations cannot lobby for an institutional progress in Serbia because there are numerous problems everywhere. On the other hand, some European actors expect the National Convention to turn a blind eye on that and say, it's great here, just give Serbia the green light. So that's the consequence of the overall enlargement process, how the European Union treated it, and in that sense, it is much more difficult to work than 5 years ago or 10 years ago when we opened the chapters. So my question is, should we become member of the EU? We should. Well, okay, let's head for it and let's demand it. Yeah, but we have this problem of turning a blind eye to media freedoms, to free elections. Well, they say they have opened the window now, and the window will be open for like 4 years. What can civil society do about making these guys here to push for a reform agenda? It's either by saying there is no reform agenda, and that's what we're going to tell the European Union. We don't know what we're going to do. There is no national convention. There is no integration process. I don't think it can get any worse than this situation. Well, the process is really very complex. So on the one hand, if I say Serbia and all these other countries should join, the EU, because the geopolitical moment is the way it is now, then it doesn't matter what we have done about the reforms. Please admit us anyway, and then we will change and get reformed along the way. We want to push for reforms, which means there still can't be any progress. Okay, let's have the final round. Where is, let's try to think about any step that the civil society can make. Well, we can't expect a big bang, some big European door opening, and that we will solve things. All of a sudden, things go and happen in parallel. Civil society cannot fight for democracy by itself. It's a political process. We can and should expect the parties to do their own part of the work. What I would like to see here is a better cooperation of the parties that have the European narrative and the Europeanization and transformation of Serbia. I want them to cooperate with civil society organizations, because we don't have such cooperation, and it's nothing like the one we had in the 90s. And thirdly, I want to defend against this argument civil sector is going in depth and not working horizontally. I think civil society is doing actually many things that otherwise would be marginalized in the society. It's a Roma position or women. When you look at how many programs, big programs were implemented about gender equality, youth, and so on, and how much we work in local communities. So it's not just about the central government. We do have an impact on some decisions and some policies. That's the role of civil society. We can't change the electoral results. That's what political parties can do. And I think political parties need to know more about democracy. They need more young people who will spread ideas. They need education, and that's where civil society can help them. And I don't think we have enough of that. In the 90s, we were also doing preparations for democracy. As a Center for Democracy, we had many roundtable discussions, privatization, different economic and social reforms. On the other hand, on the 5th of October, when the democratic change took place, all the expertise in the government came from civil society, because there were no people who would perform political and governmental functions. So it was all provided from the civil society think tanks and expert organizations. But yeah, we have to rely on political parties. Professor, do you agree? Well, indeed, I think it should be clear to everybody what the role of civil society should be. I'm just referring to what Sloba said, and in that sense, the responsibility I have is just my own role to play, and Bojana very clearly said that civil society here chose to be in that role of observer, not participant in the process, and that's how they have part of the responsibility. And they're used as an alibi. That's what also happened with Women's Platform and other organizations. I don't think that civil society organizations do not discuss what needs to be done. It's just that this government doesn't want to do it. And moreover, they're creating their own civil society organizations, the so-called gongos, that we can see not only in open calls for grants, for project proposals, but they also appear as actors in public debates. For example, with the judicial legislation package, there is this Association of Judges and Association of Prosecutors and Association of Judges and Prosecutors, which was a serious professional organization. Some of them are opposition MPs, and they quoted some of their findings not knowing what kind of organization that is, because this government has also learned its lessons in comparison to the previous time they were in power. So it's also important for the CSOs to remain independent from the incumbent government and from some future government, no matter how good and democratic it is, because this independent position enables us to remain critical. Sloba, let's finish off. Well, I don't know what you wanted me to say, because people have questions. Yes, Vukosava also wanted to say something. No, basically, I agree. Yeah, you agree with me. But you said that if the government decides in this equation, talking about civil society and democracy, we shouldn't forget that the government is playing a game, so we'll see who wins. Professor Stojiljković wanted to take the floor. As my younger colleague and former student, I'm sure he will allow me. My name is Duško Vuković. I'm deputy president of the Association of the Confederation of Autonomous Trade Unions, CATUS, of Serbia. It's an exceptional privilege to be in this circle, and I would like to say something about civil society organizations, as you all mentioned, all forms of organizations, but nobody mentioned trade unions, maybe because of our weaknesses, but basically trade unions are also part of civil society. And just one statement. Civil society, especially what Nataša said about articulating, which is now the exclusivity of political parties, perhaps we should leave it to future thoughts. Is civil society equal to civilized state and democracy? When we say civil society, because there is also non-civil society, I can recognize it. The state is not executive branch of power. The state is all of us. It's our society, and then everybody is in a sphere of that society, and the executive branch of power is the state in a narrower sense, or the government. So this executive branch has made this decision. There is no need for us to wait for that decision, because they decided there should be no democracy a long time ago. Trade unions can function freely only in a democratic society, and in no society which pretends to be democratic, it can't work without trade unions. When I say trade unions, don't get me wrong, I'm talking about civil society organizations. On the whole, it's civil society is demos, it's citizens, and in the past couple of decades, that's what we turned into. It's the right to activists and organizations for part of citizens in citizen associations or NGOs to be active. And let me tell Slobodan, probably because of many obligations that you don't have enough information. So I disagree. I'm part of JCC. It's the Joint Consultative Committee consisting of civil society organizations, employer associations, trade unions, and the European Commission. So we are very active, and we have been monitoring, but one of these two scenarios, somebody is not listening to suggestions, proposals, and everything that the civil society organizations are doing. Thank you, and congratulations to all, especially to you, Nataša and Professor Mićunović, because the foundation is people. It's not abstract, and the first generation and those that are yet to come, that's something that the Democratic Society of Serbia recognizes. Thank you. Microphone for the professor. Yes, you need to take it, please. I'm sorry, I'm taking the floor before Mićun and Vukašin. I was just their apprentice, and a rather failed apprentice, but I wanted to say one thing, but you got me annoyed. Duško said something too. Methodologically, you narrowed civil society very much with the democratic high pretext, and one part of the political spectrum which actually came from civil society, or practically in rare cases like the Green Front, it managed to maintain some connection with civil society organizations. So we are not critical enough. We don't pay due attention to our role model because we had a romantic picture. I used to be Euro fanaticist, and I am now Eurosceptical, because what the European Union is doing to us and to this region is very impactful. And then we have this craftsman attitude to this. When trade unions and NGOs say we have organized hundreds of campaigns, meetings, lectures about democracy and nationalism, and the state of play remains the same, or maybe even gets worse. So what is it that we measure? What is the impact and the indicator? Civil society then is eliminated by political parties, and in this if they were in this magma between CSOs and government, then they would also belong to civil society. But it sounds ridiculous now because, of course, they are part of the government, although you could expect political parties to also be part of CSOs. And thirdly, we need to also be self-critical. Civil society was in power or near the government in until 2003, 2004, and don't make me name some names. And as for my independence, that was the brightest period of my life when I was leading Partnership for Change in 1990s until 2001 or 2. We really risked as a union, as employees. Everybody got together in those premises, but when the privatization started, we lost our rating and our status because we were advised not to rock the boat too much against the new democratic government. So not everything was created after 2012 or 2014. We need to be in that story too. And we used to have big networks, and now in NGO sectors and the trade unions, we have family manufacturers who want to have an extra mile. Networks, it's more, as Sloba says, environmentalists and so on. It's not connected in the system of small grants and remains very little influential. If you want to be meaningful, you need trust. And the trust in NGO sector remains low amongst citizens or subjects, whatever we call it. And to conclude, this campaign, Partnership for Democratic Change, meant a lot to me. And I'm saying Partnership for Democratic Change is needed more than ever. It's not one-night stand. And it's about everybody doing what they know how to do best. It's our part of the job to push for this political landscape and to go back to restore trust, because citizens don't trust media. They believe they are just servants of the government. If they're not using their microphone to ask critical questions, they're trying to get rid of the microphone. And the political parties should say, for example, what the predominant position of citizens is, and make an operational program, and don't make me say what it is that we managed to destroy in this couple of years. Thank you. Can we take more questions, or do we call it a day? Well, if there are questions, if not, well, nobody seems to be willing to take the floor. You wanted to ask a question? Well, welcome, and I'm glad to see you all gathered here, and I'm glad that we are having a discussion. Civil societies, unlike the military and the police, differ because in the military and the police there are just orders, and it's one-way street. Discussion exists only in society, and this small sector that exists in the society undergoing major crisis remains in those organizations. So I don't want to get hopes of some other forms of organization, because that would be on the verge of high corruption and capital. I have read that in Georgia, Stalin's native land, the favorite politician who's probably going to win the elections has got 61 billion euros. So do we understand what this is about? It's billions. I stopped listening, and when I went to school, nobody talked about billions. Up to 1 million, that was fantastic. But million, I mean, 1,000 millions, it's just inconceivable. And now it's a toy to play with. So now, whoever is still alive and optimistic, looking for a way out of this situation, needs just much more accountability. Unfortunately, some politicians, present day and former, and I can see they stamped out of my NGO that I established, and now they are in the ruling party. So you can't actually tell. It would be good for us to get together and have dialogues, and this development will probably teach us a lesson. So thank you for coming, and thank you for inviting us to stay for the cocktail. What's the word?